I discovered my therapist was sharing recordings of my sessions as entertainment at dinner parties, so I gave her something truly worth discussing. Dr. Rebecca Winters came highly recommended. Yale educated, published author with a waiting list longer than my grocery receipt. For 6 months, I poured out my heart about childhood trauma, failed relationships, and the panic attacks that left me hyperventilating in grocery store aisles while strangers stared. She seemed perfect. Expensive leather chairs, diplomas covering the walls, and that way of nodding that made you feel heard. I trusted her completely with my darkest secrets. The first alarm bell rang at my friend Sarah's birthday party. A woman in an expensive silk dress approached me, her eyes glittering with recognition. "You're Emma, right? The one with the mother issues." My blood ran cold. The glass of punch fell from my fingers. I'd never met this woman before. "Rebecca tells the most captivating stories about her clients," she continued, oblivious to my horror. "Obviously, she changes names, but yours is particularly compelling. Panic attacks in the grocery store, how you called her. Sobbing from the parking lot. Brilliant material for understanding modern anxiety." The other party guests turned to look. Some nodded knowingly. My stomach clenched as I realized they'd all heard my story too. I excused myself and locked myself in the bathroom, my hands shaking. I changed the names. There was only one therapist named Rebecca I knew. The next week, I sat across from Dr. Winters, studying her face differently. The same practice smile, the same designer jacket. But now I saw something else. Calculation behind those kind blue eyes. When I mentioned being betrayed by someone I trusted, she leaned forward with that practiced empathy. "Trust is the foundation of healing." She said, "When someone violates that trust, it can open old wounds." The irony made me physically sick. That weekend, I did something that would have horrified my old self. I followed her. Dr. Winters lived in an upscale neighborhood where the houses looked like museum pieces. On Saturday night, her driveway was filled with expensive cars. Through the dining room window, I saw her the center of attention at a dinner party, a glass of wine in hand, her animated gestures telling a story. My story. She described my panic attacks, how I'd call her, sobbing from the Walmart parking lot because the fluorescent lights were triggering flashbacks. Guests hung on her every word, some laughing at what had broken me. One woman even wiped away tears of laughter. One man raised his glass to Rebecca, who makes therapy better than Netflix. I stood in her bushes, watching strangers clink glasses to my trauma, sipping wine that probably cost more than I spent on groceries. Monday morning, I made an emergency appointment. "I've been having disturbing thoughts," I told her, keeping my voice level. "Revenge fantasies, detailed ones." Her pen moved across the pad with new interest. I could almost see dollar signs in her eyes. This would be great material for dinner parties. "Tell me more about these fantasies," she said, leaning forward. I took a shaky breath, immersing myself in every acting class I'd taken in college. I constantly imagined what I would do to someone who betrayed my trust. Someone who pretended to care about me but was really using me. For the next 45 minutes, I spun intricate tales of revenge, involving public humiliation and career ruination. She wrote furiously, occasionally asking for more creative details. "This level of planning is disturbing," she said as our session ended. "We should explore this anger next week." I booked another appointment and left knowing exactly what she would discuss at her next dinner party. The irony was delicious. She'd been so eager to harness my fake revenge fantasies that she'd completely missed the real revenge plot unfolding right before her perfectly manicured face. That night, I started planning for real. First, I needed irrefutable evidence. All I had were circumstantial evidence from strangers at the party and my own observations through her window. The licensing board would have demanded more. I contacted my friend Marcus, who worked in IT security for a large corporation and had a side business helping people with technical issues that weren't always strictly legal. "I need help with a project," I told him over coffee in a small downtown cafe, choosing my words carefully. "Someone is distributing my personal information without my consent. I need to document how it's happening." Marcus was a tall, thin guy with thick glasses, looking more like a librarian than someone capable of hacking the Pentagon's servers before breakfast. He studied my face for a long moment, his dark eyes serious behind his wire-rimmed glasses. What personal information? He asked quietly, leaning forward across the small table. Medical therapy sessions, breaking hips rules. His expression immediately hardened. Marcus had been in therapy himself after a difficult divorce that had left him emotionally devastated, and the thought of someone violating this sacred trust clearly struck a nerve. "This is serious," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose with barely controlled anger. "What do you want?" Over the course of 2 days, he provided me with a collection of tiny recording devices that looked like ordinary objects. Phone chargers, pens, photo frames, even an artificial plant that could have sat innocently on a shelf. Technology was remarkable. Each device could record crystal clear audio within a 15-foot radius for up to 72 hours and automatically upload it to a secure cloud server that couldn't be traced back to me. These devices are perfectly legal as long as you're recording conversations you're participating in, Marcus explained, demonstrating how to use them in his cluttered apartment. A patient has every right to record their own therapy sessions. It's the therapist who's breaking the law by sharing that information with third parties. He also provided me with a detailed explanation of federal HIP laws, state confidentiality rules, and professional ethics codes governing mental health professionals. Dr. Winters' violations weren't simply unethical. These were serious federal offenses that could have resulted in years in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. During my next session, I arrived early and asked to use the restroom. While Dr. Winters reviewed her notes in the office, I quickly plugged one of the charging devices into the outlet behind her leather chair. A tiny indicator light showed it was already recording everything within reach. Throughout this session, I described even more elaborate revenge fantasies, including specific details about how I would document someone's professional misconduct, collect evidence of their violations, and systematically report them to every relevant licensing board and professional organization. Dr. Winters seemed particularly interested in this part, asking detailed questions about my imagined evidence-gathering process with an enthusiasm that gave me goosebumps. "I wonder how methodical your fantasy planning has become," she remarked, her pen moving quickly across the expensive paper. "It indicates a highly organized personality, responding to feelings of helplessness with fantasies of detailed control. The specificity suggests these thoughts serve an important psychological function." "Sometimes I imagine writing them down," I said, watching her reaction carefully, catching them in the act of doing something wrong, with evidence no one can deny or explain. She nodded approvingly, completely missing the fact that she was being recorded at that very moment. "Documentation can provide a sense of validation, even in fantasy," she said with professional authority. "It's the mind's way of creating evidence for experiences that might otherwise be ignored or downplayed by others." 3 days later, I returned to pick up the device, claiming I'd forgotten my phone and needed it for work. Dr. Winters was busy with another patient, so her secretary, a kindly older woman named Margaret, who had no idea what her boss was doing, let me quickly borrow it from her office. That evening, I settled in with a bottle of wine and my laptop, ready to listen to every minute of the 72-hour recording. What I heard made me physically sick, but it also gave me everything I needed to completely destroy her career. Dr. Winters shared intimate details of our sessions with at least 6 different people over that 3-day period. I overheard her on the phone with colleagues, discussing my gripping clinical case and the rich material my revenge fantasies provided for understanding modern trauma reactions. She called her sister in California to share amusing anecdotes about her distraught patients and their creative delusions. She even rehearsed her dinner party stories out loud, honing her delivery for maximum entertainment effect, like a comedian preparing new material. You should have seen her face when I suggested she keep a journal. She laughed during one phone conversation with someone named Dr. Patricia Chen. She genuinely thought writing down her violent fantasies would be therapeutic. The level of delusion was almost charming in its naivety, but the recording revealed something even worse than I imagined. Dr. Winters had violated HIPAA laws with numerous clients, not just me. I heard her discuss a 16-year-old patient's suicide attempt with alarming casualness, share details of an elderly man's dementia symptoms with someone who clearly wasn't a medical professional, and, worst of all, laugh at a domestic violence survivor's comical attempts to appear strong and independent during sessions. The teenager's case particularly horrified me. She described how the boy attempted to hang himself in his family's garage after being bullied at school for his sexuality, giving detailed details of the method he used and his parents' reaction when they found him. She gave his real name, his school, and enough identifying information for any listener to easily understand who she was talking about. His parents are in complete denial about his sexuality, she told her sister during a 40-minute phone conversation. They continue to insist it's just a phase, which is likely what prompted his suicide attempt. The whole family is a psychological goldmine. She wasn't just a bad therapist. She was a predator who fed on human grief and built her entire social life around monetizing other people's pain and suffering. The recorder also captured something I didn't expect. A long phone conversation in which Dr. Winters discussed her upcoming presentation at the annual conference of the American Psychological Association in Chicago. She planned to use anonymous patient cases as examples in her presentation on innovative approaches to treating complex trauma in modern psychology. My case was her star example. She had already written much of the presentation, describing my panic attacks, childhood trauma, and recent violent ideation with details that would make me instantly recognizable to anyone who knew me. She even planned to include quotes from our sessions, arguing that they demonstrated classic patterns of trauma response in modern therapeutic settings. I had evidence, but I wasn't finished collecting it. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the perfect patient. I booked additional sessions twice a week, claiming that my revenge fantasies were intensifying, becoming more detailed and disturbing. I described intricate plans involving identity theft, blackmail, professional sabotage, and the systematic destruction of someone's personal and professional life. Dr. Winters devoured it like a hungry person at a buffet, taking detailed notes and encouraging me to fully explore these feelings without judgment or censorship. She even suggested I keep a journal to track my progress in processing these violent thoughts, claiming it would help me understand the psychological mechanisms behind my fantasies. The more detailed you can make these imagined scenarios, the more we can understand your core psychological needs, she explained during one session, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Don't hold back. This is a safe space to explore even your darkest thoughts without fear of judgment. Each session was recorded using various devices Marcus gave me. I alternated between a phone charger, a pen, which I placed on her desk, and a small photo frame, which I placed on the shelf behind her chair. By the end of 2 weeks, I had over 12 hours of audio recordings of Dr. Winters violating professional ethics, discussing confidential patient information with unauthorized individuals, and encouraging what she considered genuine violent fantasies in a vulnerable patient. During our final session, I decided to test how far she would go in violating her professional obligations. I've done my research, I told her, keeping my voice carefully controlled and slightly ominous. I learned about the man who betrayed me. I learned where he worked, where he lived, his professional connections. I even found out his licensing board and the complaint process. Dr. Winters leaned forward like a cat spotting a wounded bird, completely absorbed in what she perceived as my descent into dangerous obsession. How does this information make you feel? She asked, her voice barely concealing her excitement at this new development. Allowing. A small smile played across my lips, as if I could ruin his entire career with one phone call. Everything he'd worked for was gone. All his professional relationships were ruined. His reputation was shattered. She nodded approvingly, her pen dancing enthusiastically across the page. That feeling of control can be quite therapeutic, even if you never act on it, she said, completely oblivious to the fact that she was encouraging potentially dangerous behavior. The fantasy of control often helps trauma victims process feelings of helplessness. But what if I do it? I asked, tilting my head in a perfect imitation of her own manner. Hypothetically, of course. What if I actually report them for professional misconduct? Would it be morally wrong, even if they deserved it? Dr. Winters actually smiled, a cold, calculating expression, quite unlike the warm empathy she usually displayed with her patients. Sometimes people need to face the consequences of their actions, she said. Her voice took on an almost predatory quality. If someone truly harms others through professional misconduct, reporting them may actually protect future victims. The greater good sometimes requires individual sacrifice. I nodded thoughtfully, as if processing this profound wisdom from my trusted therapist. You're absolutely right, I said. Some people do need to face the consequences of their actions. It's almost a moral obligation to make sure they can't harm anyone else. She beamed at me like a proud teacher whose student has finally grasped a difficult concept. Exactly. You're developing a much healthier sense of justice and responsibility. This represents significant progress in your healing. That night, I worked until 3 in the morning, compiling everything into a detailed dossier. 12 hours of audio recordings, detailed transcripts of every violation, session notes showing the pattern of abuse, copies of her calendar confirming when she discussed my case with unauthorized individuals, and a comprehensive study of every patient she mentioned by name during the recorded conversations. I created a detailed timeline showing how her violations escalated over time, including the relevant state and federal laws she violated, and attached the professional ethics codes she systematically ignored. The documentation was comprehensive enough to bring tears of joy to the prosecutor's eyes, and detailed enough to ensure no attorney could find loopholes or technicalities to exploit. I submitted it all to the state licensing board along with a detailed complaint outlining her HIPAA violations, professional misconduct, and systematic abuse of patient trust. But I didn't stop there. I sent copies to the American Psychological Association, her malpractice insurance company, the organizers of the conference where she was scheduled to speak, and every professional organization she belonged to. But I wasn't done campaigning for justice. I also prepared individual packages for the families of every patient she violated. The parents of a 16-year-old who attempted suicide received recordings of her discussions about their child's personal difficulties, as well as contact information for attorneys who specialize in medical privacy violations. The family of an elderly man with dementia received evidence of his medical data being shared with unauthorized individuals, along with documentation of how she mocked his condition for entertainment. A domestic violence survivor received detailed documentation of how her personal trauma was turned into entertainment at cocktail parties, along with resources for pursuing legal action. Each package included a detailed explanation of their legal rights, contact information for attorneys specializing in medical data breaches, and copies of all relevant evidence, organized to make it easy for the attorneys to build their case. I then called Channel 7 News and asked to speak with their investigative reporting team. I have documentation of a local therapist systematically violating patient privacy laws. I told the investigative journalist, a woman named Jessica Martinez, who specializes in healthcare fraud cases. Multiple patients, multiple violations, records of everything. Are you interested in a story that might expose widespread abuse in the mental health care system? They were very interested. Very interested, in fact. 2 days later, my phone rang at 7:30 a.m. Doctor. Winters appeared on the screen, and when I answered, her voice was strained with barely contained panic. Emma, she said, the polished professional veneer completely gone, replaced by pure desperation. I need to see you immediately. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. People are making accusations that simply aren't true, and I need to explain. There is no misunderstanding, I said calmly, sipping my morning coffee and watching the sunrise from my kitchen window. You violated my trust and the trust of every patient who has placed their trust in you. You turned our trauma into entertainment for your dinner parties and professional advancement. I never used my real names in social situations, she said, her voice rising to an almost hysterical tone. Everything was completely anonymous and protected by doctor-patient confidentiality. I followed all the proper protocols. You used enough details to allow complete strangers to recognize me at a party, I interrupted, my voice keeping even and controlled. And I have recordings of you using real names and identifying information from several patients in conversations with unauthorized individuals who have no legitimate need for that information. The silence lasted so long I thought she had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. What do you want? Money? I can pay you whatever it takes. We can handle this privately without involving the authorities. I don't need anything from you, I said, feeling deep satisfaction at her obvious horror. I already have everything I need to ensure you never harm another patient again. Please, she pleaded, all pretense of professionalism completely gone. I've made mistakes, but my career, my reputation, my family, I have children who depend on me. This will destroy everything I've worked for. Your career is built on exploiting vulnerable people, I said, my voice hardening. Your reputation is built on violating the most fundamental trust in healthcare. Perhaps it's time to put an end to both of those things so that other patients can be protected from you. I can change, she said desperately. I can get help, get more training, make things right. Please don't ruin my life over some stupid mistakes." "They weren't mistakes," I said. "They were deliberate choices you made repeatedly over many years. You chose to violate patient confidentiality for your own amusement and professional gain. You chose to encourage dangerous fantasies over providing proper treatment. You chose to build your career on the suffering of others." I hung up and immediately blocked her number. The story appeared 3 days later with the headline, "Local Therapist Under Investigation for Systematic Violation of Patient Confidentiality." The article, written by Jessica Martinez, included quotes from numerous affected patients, details of an ongoing ethics investigation, and mention of possible criminal prosecution for HIPAA violations. The reaction was immediate and devastating for Dr. Winters. Her practice closed within a week, and her secretary left apologetic voicemails explaining that all patients would receive copies of their files and referrals to other specialists. Her license was suspended pending the investigation. A conference appearance was canceled. Her malpractice insurance company dropped her after reviewing the evidence I provided. The local medical community was abuzz with gossip about the case. Other therapists began frantically re-examining their own practices, fearing similar exposure. The licensing board announced new mandatory training on patient confidentiality laws and the introduction of random compliance audits. But the real satisfaction came when the criminal investigation began. The district attorney's office assigned a prosecutor specializing in healthcare fraud. Detective Maria Santos called me to schedule an interview about the case, and when we met at the police station, her professionalism was tinged with obvious anger at what Dr. Winters had done. "I've been practicing medical crimes for 8 years, she told me as we sat in Stark's interrogation room with its fluorescent lights and metal table. "I've never seen such meticulous documentation or such systematic violations. You've essentially assembled the entire case for us." "I was well motivated," I said simply. The prosecutor, James Mitchell, was a thin man with graying hair who looked as if he fed on coffee and righteous indignation. As he reviewed my evidence, his eyes lit up with the enthusiasm prosecutors reserve for clear-cut cases. Dr. Winters had repeatedly and systematically violated federal law, he explained, spreading my documentation across the conference table. HIPAA violations can carry criminal penalties of up to 10 years in prison and fines of up to $250,000 for each violation. Based on your evidence, we are considering multiple felony charges that could result in decades of prison time. But the investigation uncovered even more violations than I documented. When they searched Dr. Winters' office and home, they found years of patient files that she had illegally copied and stored for her own use. They discovered that she had sold anonymous patient records to pharmaceutical companies for marketing research, written journal articles based on patients' cases without their consent, and even negotiated a book contract featuring her most compelling patient stories. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of a formal licensing board hearing. The room was filled with former patients, journalists, other medical professionals who had come to witness the downfall of a man who had violated medicine's most sacred precept, and family members of patients whose privacy had been violated. Dr. Winters had lost a significant amount of weight and looked several years older than she had in her office. Her expensive designer clothes had been replaced by a simple black suit that hung loosely on her diminished frame. Her once perfect hair was now streaked with gray, and she glanced nervously around the gallery filled with people whose lives she had ruined. Her lawyer, a nervous man named David Kowalski, who clearly knew he was losing the battle, desperately tried to argue that my records had been obtained illegally and should be inadmissible. The licensing board's legal counsel immediately refuted this. "Patients have an absolute right to record their own therapy sessions," the counselor patiently explained. Dr. Winters' violations occurred in the presence of her patient, making all recordings completely legal and admissible under federal and state law. When my name was called to testify, I slowly stood, feeling the weight of every aggrieved patient's hopes for justice on my shoulders. Dr. Winters had once told me that trust is the foundation of healing. I began, and my voice carried clearly throughout the quiet room. She was absolutely right. When someone violates this trust, especially someone in a position of power and authority, it can reopen old wounds and create new trauma. But sometimes it can also give you the strength and resolve to ensure they never harm anyone again. I methodically presented my evidence, walking the panel through 12 hours of recordings documenting systematic violations spanning several patients over several years. I showed them how she exploited our most vulnerable moments for entertainment, how she constructed professional presentations based on our personal problems, how she turned our healing process into her personal profit center. The committee members' faces grew increasingly grim as they listened to recording after recording of Dr. Winters laughing at patients' injuries, sharing identifying information with unauthorized individuals, and treating confidential medical information as gossip to be traded for social capital. Dr. Winters' attorney attempted to cross-examine me, suggesting I had framed his client by fabricating elaborate revenge fantasies, specifically designed to provoke her into violations. So, do you admit that you intentionally created fictional content designed to manipulate Dr. E. Winters into committing violations? He asked, clearly believing he had found a weakness in my case. I smiled calmly, anticipating this attack. I told Dr. Winters exactly what she wanted to hear. Stories she could turn into entertainment for her dinner parties, I said. The fact that she encouraged and documented what she considered genuine violent fantasies, instead of properly treating them or referring me to appropriate help, only proved how unfit she was to practice therapy. The lawyer's face fell as he realized his question had only worsened his client's situation. Other patients testified to their own violations. Dr. Winters' former colleagues testified to suspicious conversations and inappropriate disclosures they had witnessed but failed to report. Even her secretary, Margaret, testified about a constant stream of personal calls during which confidential patient information was openly discussed. The hearing lasted 3 days, with over 20 witnesses and hundreds of exhibits presented. Dr. Winters herself did not take the stand on the advice of her lawyer, who knew that anything she said could be used against her in a pending criminal case. The commission deliberated within 2 hours. Dr. Rebecca Winters' license was revoked for life. She was ordered to pay fines totaling $75,000 to the state licensing board and faced additional criminal charges for HIPAA violations, which could have resulted in jail time and federal fines exceeding $2 million. Sir, she said as we left the courtroom. She approached me in the hallway. Her eyes were red and desperate, her previously perfect appearance completely disheveled. I hope ruining my life cost you your moment of revenge, she said bitterly, her voice shaking with rage and despair. I looked at her calmly, feeling only cold satisfaction and complete vindication. I didn't ruin your life, I said. Your choice ruined your life. I simply documented them and made sure the people you harmed knew what you did to them. You were supposed to be my patient, not my judge and jury. You're right. I was supposed to be your patient, but you turned me into your entertainment instead. You had a choice every time you shared my personal information. You chose to violate my trust for your own amusement. Her face crumpled as the full weight of her situation finally hit her. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. People just liked stories. It made me popular at parties. I felt important. You felt important turning other people's pain into your own personal comedy show. I said, every laugh you got was at the expense of someone who confided in you their deepest traumas. A year later, I received a call from Detective Santos with a final update on the criminal case. Dr. Winters had pleaded guilty to 12 felony counts of HIPAA violations to avoid a trial that would have resulted in even harsher penalties. She received 3 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $1.8 million in restitution to her victims. But more importantly, my case opened the floodgates of accountability throughout the mental health system. 3 more former patients from her previous practice in Portland came forward with similar complaints. An investigation revealed that she had been violating patient confidentiality for over a decade, using her clients' most vulnerable moments as material for parties and conferences across several states. The Federal Bureau of Investigation took over the case, investigating it as organized healthcare fraud. They uncovered a network of medical professionals who improperly shared patient information, and several other therapists and doctors were now under investigation for similar violations. Licensing authorities in 5 states launched investigations into Dr. Winters' past practices and those of her accomplices. Her former colleagues were questioned about what they knew and when they knew it. The entire mental health care system implemented new oversight procedures, mandatory reporting requirements, and random compliance audits to prevent similar violations. I never returned to therapy after that experience, not because I didn't need it, but because I learned something more valuable than any session could have. Sometimes the best healing comes from refusing to let people hurt you with impunity and ensuring they can't hurt anyone else. The nonprofit I founded, Protecting Patient Privacy, now helps other victims of healthcare privacy breaches navigate the legal system and fight providers who abuse their trust. We helped secure convictions against 12 medical professionals and recovered over $5 million in compensation for injured patients. Last month, I was invited to speak at the annual conference of the American Psychological Association, the very conference where Dr. Winters planned to present my case as entertainment. I stood at the podium where she was supposed to stand and told the true story of what happens when medical professionals violate patients' trust. The audience remained silent throughout my presentation. When I finished, I received a standing ovation for 5 minutes. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She was crying. My therapist shared the story of my eating disorder at her book club. She said, "I thought I was crazy for being upset about it. Thank you for showing me I wasn't wrong to feel violated." I gave her my business card and put her in touch with one of our attorneys. Some people collect stamps. Some people collect coins. Some people collect vintage wine or rare books. Dr. Rebecca Winters collected other people's pain and trauma, hoarding our most vulnerable moments as trophies to display for social capital. But I collected something far more valuable: justice, accountability, and the satisfaction of knowing a predator can no longer harm the people who trusted her most. The best part? Every time someone Googles her name, they find articles about her crimes. Every potential future patient she might have exploited will know exactly what kind of person she really is. At every dinner party she might have attended, people will know she's a convicted felon who betrayed the most sacred precepts of healthcare. Her reputation, which was more important to her than the well-being of her patients, is forever destroyed. And that, as she might say if she were still licensed to practice therapy, is quite therapeutic.